Today we're continuing our series on the seven churches in Revelation, and today we're getting to the one in Pergamos. And we're going to talk about spiritual pollution today. You know, I was watching a documentary the other day about plastic in the ocean and how bad that has gotten some places, and a lot of it is, or some of it is from fishing, like nets and traps and stuff like that. And there was this one young person, and she was in her 20s, and she'd really had a passion for this, and she was going throughout New England and bringing up traps that had been lost, okay, and recycling them and getting rid of the plastic. And I thought, what a great idea, that taking away this pollution out of the ocean and making it a healthier place. You know, there's spiritual pollution, though. In churches, it happens, you know, where you have false teaching and people teaching things that aren't appropriate and not linked to the Bible. And that's what was going on in this church. And I think it's still relevant for today very much. And so we're at the third church in Revelation. I got a map here of the seven. And this was like a mail route in which these letters went to the different churches. We've talked about Ephesus and Smyrna, and today we're at Pergamos. And to understand what's going on back then, today we need to understand what's going on back then, because it's connected together. And so it'd be great to have somebody to help us with this. And thank goodness, thank the Lord, we have today the mayor of Pergamon. Welcome, Yazas. My name is Pliny. Everybody say Pliny. Not Pliny, Pliny. And I'm the mayor of the greatest city in Asia, Pergamum. Pergamum is a city on a hill. In fact, the name Pergamum means citadel. A citadel is like a fortified area at the top of a city. And this whole city was built on a cone-shaped mountain. Okay, and it's a beautiful place. It's 40 miles north of Smyrna, and you turn right and go inland 10 miles, and you come to our great city. Most of our city is built on a hill 1,000 feet high above the Caicus River Valley. We have a great library. We have a lot of great things here. We got a picture of the stadium there. The next slide. There you go. See, this is the steepest stadium in antiquity. It was a beautiful place, and it was way up on a mountain. I got another slide of the stadium, and people would sit on this mountain and watch plays and stuff. We have a tremendous library, 200,000 volumes. It's only second to Alexander. The word parchment comes from the name of our city, Pergamum, because they developed parchment and made books out of the parchment. And our city was planned out on top of the hill. It was very organized. The public buildings were at the top. They called it the Acropolis. Then under the Acropolis, there was a residential area for the rich people. And then under that was the marketplace. And then at the bottom of the hill was the poor folks that lived there. I have a map there of the different temples that were located on the top. And it's hard to imagine how beautiful it is today, because you only see ruins, which is not right. I got a picture here, the next one. The bottom picture is what the ruins look like, but imagine what it looked like in my day. Colorful, beautiful colors, and it was just fabulous place to live. White, red, blue, scarlet, all kinds of beautiful temples, and it was a beautiful city. And so one of the main things about Pergamon is our temples. This is what we were known for. Nearly every major deity had a temple in Pergamum. It would be like going to your Hollywood in California, and you went on the Star Tour, and you got on a little van, and they took you to all the neighborhoods where the exclusive, important people, movie stars, live or used to live. You could do that. In fact, why don't we do that? Let's do that here today in Pergamum. So I'm going to take you to some of the temples. The first temple is the temple of Zeus. This was one of the largest temples. It was absolutely a beautiful temple. Zeus was the king of Mount Olympus. He was the king of the other gods. He was the god of lightning and thunder, and he used that against his enemies. If you needed something big to be done, then you went to the temple of Zeus. They actually moved it to Berlin at one time. You can ask me about that. Actually, ask my pastor about that later. I'm Pliny. Okay, the next slide. The next slide is what it looks like today in Berlin. Okay, so if you needed something big done, now if you wanted to go somewhere to have a good time, for pleasure, you would go to the temple of Dionysius. Dionysius was a temple, was the god of wine and partying, okay? It was like going to a rave. And they had all kinds of different things going on. I'm not going to talk about all of them because we're in a Christian church, but there was a lot of adult things that went on in this temple. We had a 3-day festival of Dionysus in the spring. We had a parade in March. The next slide shows where the temple was. It was next to the theater. You can't see anything now, unfortunately. It looks terrible, but back then it was beautiful. They would have a feast to Aphrodite in May, and so this temple, if you wanted to go to have a good time, you went to the temple of Dionysius. Maybe you were in need of food. Yeah, we got a temple for that. You go to the temple of Demeter. Demeter, she was the one who could guarantee, that's the slide there, food on your table. And if you want a wonderful crop at the end of the season, you would go to the temple of Demeter. And a lot of people went to this temple, especially at times of planting. Maybe you're sick. If you were sick, you would go to the temple of Asclepion. This is the temple of Asclepion. It was a healing center, one of the major spots in the world. The next slide is of it too, of healing. The temple was connected to snakes. You like snakes? These were non-poisonous snakes. And so if you went to this temple, you would go through a tunnel, and then you would go into this room. And if you were sick, they would give you this medication that was like a sedative. And they would have you lie down in a room that was dark, and then they would release the snakes. And the snakes would come and crawl on your body, okay? And then you would wake up. And when you woke up, you in this vision state, you would be told where your problem was. And you could tell the doctors, and they would work on it. In fact, they had another room where you could make a clay image of what your problem was. In fact, today, they have these symbols that use in the medical field. It is the rod of Asclepius that comes all the way back from that. The rod of Asclepius on the left, it was connected with healing. Unfortunately, there's this caduceus, which today has become known as a healing symbol. In fact, it's on doctors' uniforms. Next time you see this, know that they got it wrong. This is not the symbol for healing. This was a symbol for actually merchants, travelers, thieves, and swindlers. Okay, and so the real symbol is the rod of Asclepius. Okay, so if you're sick, you went to that place. Maybe you need wisdom. Maybe you need to learn something good. You don't know what to do. Go to the temple of Athena, which is the next one, and the goddess of wisdom, and she would get you understanding for your military strategy so Rome could win its wars. The most important temple probably of all the temples was the temple that you affirmed Caesar, because we were connected to the Romans. The Romans ran everything, was the temple of the imperial cult, which is the next one. The temple of the imperial cult, we had the first temple to Emperor Augustus. We had in this time, the time that the Bible was written, we had 3 temples to emperors. It was the official center of the cult of the emperor. And so this is some of the temples that we have in our terrific city. I hope you get to visit. So good to see you. Goodbye. Goodbye to Pliny. Everybody say goodbye. Andeo. Andeo. All right. Now, that's the background. Let's get to the text itself. Words of greeting. All the letters have this words of greeting section. And it begins in verse 12. To the angel of the church in Pergamum write. And so this is the messenger of the church or the angel of the church in Pergamum. Some people would say he was the pastor of the church in Pergamum, but this letter is written specifically for Pergamum. These are the words of him who has the sharp double-edged sword. And so he's talking about Jesus. This is another words for Jesus, and it's describing Jesus as one who has a sharp, double-edged sword. So my wife Sharon said, aren't all swords double-edged? So I looked it up. Nope. Swords that aren't double-edged were the backsword, the cutlass, the the falcata, the Khyber sword, the Messer sword, the saber, the scimitar, and the scythe. So anybody wants to know. But this double-edged sword, I thought it would be like, the Roman swords I see. But no, the word for this the sword is a special kind of sword. It looks like this, okay? It's this double-edged sword with a long handle. Okay, and it is the symbol that he is looking. I got another picture that shows you what actually the sword looked like. You would use two hands to use this. And so this sword was used for executions. This was not a, Three Musketeers fighting sword. This was a battle axe type of sword. And so the letter starts with, to the angel of the church, these are the words of ones who has the sharp double-edged sword. Pretty scary opening words. And then it has words of praise. It says, I know where you live, where Satan has his throne, yet you remain true to my name. And so this is a positive thing. You live in a very scary place. All these things. Now, what exactly is Satan's throne? This is debated by a lot of people, exactly what the throne of Satan was in this day. And so I want to go through just a few of the ones that maybe it could have been. First of all, the Acropolis on the top of the city kind of looks like a throne as you're walking to it. And so in the previous city, Smyrna looked like a crown when you were sailing to it, and so it could have been the Acropolis. Second, it could have been all of the idols, all the altars, all of the shrines. That was what the city was known for, and because I could have made it the throne of Satan. The third one could have been the altar to Zeus. This was one of the biggest ones, and he was the chief of gods. The struggle with this number 2 and number 3 is that they had these altars, they had these temples in all of the large ancient Asian cities. So why would this city be the throne of Satan? You could have said it's the cult of Asclepios, which is kind of a creepy cult, isn't it? With the snakes. The symbol of this cult was a snake. Now in the Garden of Eden, they had the serpent that tempted Adam and Eve. So that could have been the sign of this is the throne of Satan, this cult. But probably they had Asclepios' cults though in other cities. It's probably one down. It was probably the cult of the emperor. The cult of the emperor was the temple for Augustus or other Roman emperors. This was the main one. This was the number one cult of the emperor. It was the first one here in this city. And so that's why it's probably known as the throne of Satan. Can you imagine living in a place that was a combination of Las Vegas, the bad side, as well as maybe Mardi Gras and New Orleans? This was a very worldly, secular, party-going city that was dedicated not to God in any kind of way. And so he says, I know where you live, where Satan has his throne, yet you remain true to my name. You don't make sacrifices to the emperor. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness. Now, we don't know, read about this. We don't really know much about Antipas. It never mentions him anywhere else in the Bible. There is traditions from the 3rd century that says Antipas was one of the leaders in the church and that he was killed. He was put in a metal idol and burned and roasted to death, and it was a terrible way to die. And so he was a leader in the town that did not give up his faith. By the way, the word here for witness You know what that word is in Greek? The word is martyr. This was before they ever used the word martyr as one who died for their faith. Isn't it ironic that the word for martyr came from the place where is the throne of Satan? And these people gave their lives for their faith. He was the faithful martyr. He gave his life. He was put to death in your city where Satan lives. That's a pretty scary place to be, where Satan lives. And so, that's the words of encouragement. You have withstood that temptation, even though you were in a terrible place. Then there are words of warning. This church does have words of warning, unlike Smyrna. And he says, nevertheless, I have a few things against you. He says, there are some among you who hold to the teaching of Balaam. Remember last week when I said the code book for Revelation is the Old Testament. And if you want to figure out what Revelation means, you need to understand the Old Testament. And here he's referring to a story in the Old Testament that we're going to unpack. But he says, you hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin. So they ate food sacrificed to idols, and they committed porneia, which really means fornication. So they did this back then in the children of Israel when they were going to go into the new promised land. And so this story comes from Numbers 22, verses 4 through 6. I'm going to give you a little backstory. So the children of Israel were released from captivity. They got the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, and then they tried to go to the Holy Land, but they disobeyed God. And because they disobeyed God, God made him punished by wandering in the desert for 40 years. And when they finally got to start going into the Holy Land, they had a couple of big battles, and it was a large number of Jews. And these Israelites won these battles, and there was a king, Balak, and he was a king, and he was thinking, gosh, they're so strong, I need to do something because they're going to kill us. And the people the Moabites said to the elders of Midian, this horde, this is description of the Israelites, is going to lick up everything around us, pretty vivid, as an ox licks the grass of the field. So Balak, the king of the Midianites, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to send this Gentile prophet named Balaam, son of Beor, who was at Pethor, and near the Euphrates River in his native land. And Balak said to them, a people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the land and have settled next to me. Now come and put a curse on these people because they are too powerful for me. So the king wanted Balaam. He was going to hire Balaam to put a curse on them. Perhaps then I'll be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed. And so he gets Balaam to come, and Balaam says, okay, if you're going to pay me, I'll come. And he asks him to curse them. But then Balaam goes to God, and God said, nope, can't do it. And so Balaam says, I can't do it. Well, they keep going through this process. Balaam keeps trying to curse them, but God won't let him curse them. In fact, Balaam blesses them. And so Balaam comes up with another plan. Because he can't directly curse the Israelites, he suggests this plan in Numbers 25. And if you really want to get into it, read these chapters, 24, 25, 26. It says, while Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to their sacrifices to their gods. And the people ate sacrificial meal and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. And so over 20,000 of the Israelites died because they listened and were seduced by these women and sacrificing, eating these meals to the temple of these people, the Midianites. And so we learn in chapter 31, that this idea came from Balaam. So even though Balaam didn't curse them outright, he gave them advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord. And in the Peor incident, so that the plague struck the Lord's people. And so Revelation is looking back to this story where this guy covertly seduced the people by using, not a clear cursing them, but getting them to do things that they shouldn't do. And John is saying in the book of Revelations to this city, likewise, you also hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Now, the teaching of the Nicolaitans was basically the same as the teaching of these followers of Balaam. And so the idea was this was a heresy, and they said, you go along with this, okay, even though you don't make a big deal of it, you go ahead and go to these temples, and it's okay to have meals in the temples. Now, if you remember in the book of Acts, Paul says it's okay to eat meat sacrificed from idols if you go to a market, because there's no such thing as gods. But that is different than actually going to the temple and partaking in a feast in the temple. And this is what's saying you don't do that. Because in some of these temples, not only did they have meals, but they had ritual prostitution. And he says, this is going to suck you in. And some of the people in the church were being sucked into this false teaching by these teachers, the Nicolaitans. If you remember the letter to the church in Ephesians, Jesus or John said to them, I'm glad that you hate the Nicolaitans because I hate them too. Here, they like the Nicolaitans. They let them in the church. So what's the solution? The solution is what Revelation 2:16 says, repent, which basically means change. And there's sometimes in our life, our personal life, sometimes the life of a church, when you're doing something or somebody is teaching something and you need to change. You not only need to change, you need to repent for it. You need to kind of turn the other direction and say, we were wrong. We shouldn't have done that. Otherwise, if you don't do this, he's strong here. He says, I will come to you and fight against you with the same kind of sword I listed before. This battle axe of my mouth. So it's really strong words for this church if they keep following these false teachers. And then it has the closing words. And the closing words, like many of the other letters, say, whoever has ears to hear, let them hear what the Spirit says, not only to this church, but to all the churches, including our church today. And to the one who's victorious, Nike, I will give some of the hidden manna. Or what does he mean by that? We'll talk about it. I also give a person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives us. To be understand that these last closing words, you have to ask yourself, well, what is the hidden manna? Okay, there's a few different interpretations. One interpretation is there's a Jewish legend of a jar of manna that fell in the wilderness. Remember, they got manna every day, and somehow they had a jar of manna that they put in the Ark of the Covenant. When Solomon's temple was destroyed, Jeremiah hid the ark of the underground at Mount Sinai until Indiana Jones found it and took it to, no, that didn't happen. But there was this manna that was hidden in this temple. Secondly, the hidden manna could stand for the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper. Okay, and the final messianic day when Jesus comes back, it could stand for spiritual food given to the overcomers who overcame the worldly temptations of this town. Or it could be the hidden manna is Jesus, because Jesus said, I am the bread. I am the bread. And so the hidden manna could be Jesus Christ. And I said, I'll give you this hidden manna. Secondly, what is the white stone? It says that you'll have a white stone with your name on it. Well, what is that? Well, there was this legend that jewels fell with the manna in the wilderness, or it could be one of the stones on the breastplate of the high priest that had the names of the 12 tribes on each of the stones. It could be that in ancient trials, jurors would cast a white stone or a black stone in a vase to either vote for acquittal or guilt. It could be people used white stones in that day as a ticket for admission to the games. Pagans sometimes used magical amulets with secret names of their gods on them for luck. Don't think it was that one. Gladiators, when they were freed from the arena, guess what they were given? A stone. Or it could just be a metaphor. Have you ever heard somebody say, oh, well, it's written in stone? Written in stone. I think probably it was talking about that God is approving and giving you a new name, like he gave Peter a new name, the Rock. He came from Cephas to Peter, the Rock. And when you follow God, God wants to reward you. Maybe when you get to heaven, you may get a white stone. I was going to get a bunch of white stones and give them out to everybody today with a little name on it that said Jesus, but it's been a busy week, so sorry. So, this is what this all meant back then. What does this mean today for us? How can you tell if someone is a false teacher? Pretty important question. Remember the story of the Trojan horse? It's well known from Homer's The Odyssey. Of Greek soldiers were able to take Troy, even though they had 10 years, they couldn't get in it. But they did it by making this big hollow wooden horse, and they hid in the horse and pretended to desert the battlefield. And they sailed to a nearby island. They left behind these men hidden in the horse, and they told the city of Troy that this was a gift to the goddess Athena, the goddess of war. And they brought the Trojan horse into their city, and that night the men snuck out, and the army came back, and they opened the front doors and let people in. And so it became an image of how what's most dangerous comes from the inside. And I wonder today, even today, we live in a culture today that is no longer Christian. It's no longer a country today, America, that is, you got home court advantage. It just isn't. I was watching an advertisement on this news for this advertisement. It wasn't on the news. It was an advertisement. This guy was saying, our stock investing firm will be open every day of the year, even Christmas Eve and Christmas. And they were bragging on that because it's all about money. You know, and our whole culture is based on money and power and sex, and those things are what's in the culture. But maybe the most dangerous thing, though, is not the culture we live in, it's within our churches. And there are false teachings that go on. Jesus said this in Matthew 7:15-20. He says, watch out for what? False prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing. They look good. Inwardly, though, you can't see it, but they're ferocious wolves. He says, by their fruit, you'll recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. And a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. And every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. And so I was thinking about what are some of the major problems with churches today and the false prophets. There's lots of different kinds. I thought about the prosperity theology that's taught by some of them on television. And I could list a long list of them. There are people online who have made huge lists of false prophets, and I agree with some of them. I don't agree with some of them. But there's definitely people it's about feel-good religion. It's using pragmatism. And the idea is whatever gets people to come to church, that's good, and that's right. I know a church that was trying to reach unchurched people, and they were playing a Pink Floyd song in the worship time, and one of the people had to get up and leave. And somebody asked him later, why'd you leave? He said, well, I just had a flashback because I used to do drugs and listen to that. And he had a flashback. But people do things in church to get people to come, to make it entertaining, and they think that makes it right. That's not what makes it right. And so here's just 3 quick principles of how do you tell what's a false teacher. The first one is pretty simple. A false teacher teaches falsehood. I mean, it's pretty simple. Any people who teach falsehood, there are, and I want to say clearly, there's a difference between heresy and just making mistakes. I mean, a lot of people that are young and coming out of getting into the pastorate might teach something and they're wrong, and later on they realize that. But a false teacher is uncorrectable. Okay, this is another sign. A false teacher is uncorrectable. Now, Calvin said once that no theologian, human theologian, is more than 80% right. Because we're not perfect. The problem is we don't agree exactly what that 20% is. But here are some basic things that I think are important. If you deny the Trinity, if you deny the deity of Christ, if you deny that he lived a sinless life, if you deny the substitutionary death, if you deny salvation by grace through faith, if you deny the gospel, those things are the drivetrain on the Christian faith. And what we sang about it, I believe that song that we sung, I love the words of that song. These things are non-negotiable. You can negotiate some things, you can debate some areas of the faith because nobody knows for sure about some things, but there's this core doctrinal, essential truth, the incarnation, substitutionary death, bodily resurrection, all God and all human at the same time. These are core truths. And someone who is not according to those is a false teacher. And if someone is uncorrectable, there was Apollos in the New Testament, in the book of Acts. He didn't understand a lot about the baptism, but he was corrected, he was taught more, and Apollos became a great preacher. So he wasn't a heretic, he was just incorrect in some of his theology, and he was able to learn the correct way. But a false teacher is not correctable. 3, a false teacher will be known by his or her fruit. Now, a lot of times when people think of fruit, they think of their results. And this is where it gets mixed up. Sometimes people think, well, the church is growing, so it must be true. Nope. That's not the sign that something is true. It may be the sign that something is attractive or something people like it. Okay, but known by his fruit. Now, we think of the results of the church, but the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Does the teacher have those gifts? Are they a person that exemplifies love, joy, and peace, and patience, and kindness, and goodness? Does their fruit bear witness to what they're teaching? So it's not only what they're teaching, it's how they're living. And this is what was going on in this city. It wasn't so much that the Nicolaitans had this really screwed up theology. They had this really screwed up teaching that they were getting people to do these things. And so their fruit was not good. Now, this is important, and I want to let you know it's so important. Look what happened in the Old Testament to this illustration. Remember the people that were trying to get Balaam to curse the Israelites? What happened to them? Well, in Numbers 31:16, they were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. So the Israelites who went along with Balaam's seduction and intermarried and got involved with in sacrificial worship and in these kinds of sexual things, God struck them with a plague. And what happened to Balaam? Well, in Joshua 13:22, it says, in addition to those slain in the battle, the Israelites had to put to death Balaam, son of Beor, who practiced divination. Evidently, Balaam went back to this group of people to get his money. And when he got back to them, get his money for his services, his advice he'd given, it was just when the Israelites attacked them and Balaam was killed. And so this is really strong words that advises us today that we would listen and to think about what God is leading us and use the Bible as our authority. And don't be sucked in to false teaching. And even in a culture that's anti-Christian, we can be God's shining light if we follow him and listen to his word.